So let's talk about aliens and UFOs. There's actually two periods of UFO aircraft sightings
set 50 years apart in the United States.
The first sightings are not what you might think of. In the late 1800s, known as the Airship Wave, which happened from November 1896 to May 1897, featured Zeppelin-like craft or airships floating over parts of the United States. And then there was the more famous one, the Roswell Incident in the 1940s. Each one of them, in my opinion, have origins in science fiction and popular media from their respective eras. Additionally, both of these periods seem to mirror each other in timeline of events and the resulting hysteria. So first, let's talk about the US in the mid to late 1800s. Saw a surge in science fiction from the likes of writers like H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, and Edgar Allan Poe. Additionally, it was a period of disregard for integrity in newspapers. Known as yellow journalism, not only were hoaxes common, but there was no shame about it either. In 1844, published in the Sun newspaper, Edgar Allan Poe writes about European monk masons' trip across the Atlantic Ocean and what was known as a dirigible or airship. However, this type of trip was impossible at the time because even though these type of balloon crafts or dirigibles existed, they were very rudimentary and would not fly very long distances without issues. Next, we have to talk about pulp magazines or dime novels, which exploded onto the scene in the late 1800s. They were affordable, which made them accessible to everyone. Especially a popular type of magazine called the Frank Reade Stories. Started in 1882, it was frequently centered on a boy and his new inventions, which were mostly airships, but also other types of machinery. Frank Reade Library ran up to 191 stories. There's lots of airship stories. Then we have even more sci-fi action within the likes of Jules Verne, Robur the Conqueror. Published in 1886, the story features a mysterious man in his powerful airship. These stories were all published before the airship waves of 1896 and 1897. Additionally, all of them featured dirigibles or airships. So let's talk about these airship waves now. Some of these ships were described as cigar-shaped, having wings or propellers, and an attached undercarriage. On November 18, 1896, the Sacramento Bee published an account of the first airship sighting. Observers recall seeing an object move slowly across the Sacramento skies. It was approximately 1,000 feet in the air and reportedly being powered by two men pedaling bicycle pedals. The front of the airship had a light affixed in the undercarriage. An individual reported hearing instructions emanating from the craft, urging an increase in elevation. On November 22nd, another sighting was reported in the same area. A light floated out of the northwest sky at around 5:30 and headed for the middle of Sacramento. One witness described it like a strong white light, seemingly moving as if it was a balloon. Another witness also recalled it talking and showing signs and wonders from heaven. Paradoxically though, there was also a similar sighting in San Francisco on the same evening at the same time. On November 27, 1896, the evening edition of the Stockton featured one of the earliest accounts of an alleged alien craft sighting. It was witnessed by Colonel H.G. Shaw, who was a previous editor for the Stockton Mail. On November 25th, Shaw and a companion observed three beings coming out of the ship, which was floating over water. The ship was 150 feet and 20 feet wide, with a rudder at the back and the ship pointed at both ends. The beings approached Shaw and examined him. After the encounter, they walked back to the ship, and the ship flew away out of sight. Lots of airships shown in the Frank Reade stories also had rudders at the back, and were also long. Furthermore, why would a ship capable of interstellar travel have use for a rudder? Our space shuttles use rudders, but only in Earth's atmosphere. A rudder is useless in space because it will not maneuver without any air, and there is no air in space. And then began the second wave, which took place from January 22nd, 1897 to late May 1897. One person in Arkansas received information that an airship was en route to Cuba, and the pilot intended to deploy its Hotchkiss gun against hostile forces. Another airship reported in Nebraska vanished into thin air, leaving a man standing in its place. The airship pilot then proceeded to show a small contraption claiming it's capable of stowing the airship to a size small enough to be stowed within his pocket. In other cases, there were airships dropping items like letters. The Milwaukee Sentinel reported several letters being dropped as it passed overhead. One letter noted a ship named Pegasus, claiming that its advanced technology would revolutionize all present methods of locomotives. Additionally, some notes were dropped in Kentucky and Ohio, and the letters were signed by none other than a Captain Pegasus. So it's clear that these waves of airship sightings were probably not rooted in reality. Even if some were real, definitely most of them weren't. But the media was happy to spread their stories because it benefited them. It should be noted that aviation history experts agree that most, if not all, these sightings were probably hoaxes because, again, no such type of airship existed at the time, at least not at this scale. As with the late 1800s, the early 1900s also saw a rise in pulp magazines. Some of examples of popular magazines include Amazing Stories, Astounding Stories, Weird Tales, Wonder Stories, Science Wonder Stories, Super Science Stories, Planet Stories, and Science Fiction Quarterly. Exciting technology was being developed, and with it came more stories of new frontiers of space and technology. These magazines popularized concepts such as aliens and flying saucers. These examples predate the Roswell Incident in 1947. The earliest one came from an April 1918 issue of the Electrical Experimenter. So here's some of these magazines now. We have a Buck Rogers comic strip from the 1930s. In this comic strip, we can see a flying saucer type craft and even an alien abduction. Additionally, there was another comic strip, Flash Gordon, in the 1930s, also featured flying saucer-like craft, and they even appeared on the 1936 serial, which was projected on the big screen. Now let's talk about the Roswell Incident. Researchers involved with Project Mogul, a government project designed to monitor nuclear tests from the Soviet Union, launched a series of balloons identified as Flight 4 from Alamogordo Army Airfield on June 4th. They monitored Flight 4 as it traveled in a northeastern direction toward Corona. Eventually, they lost contact with it when it was approximately 17 miles away from a ranch. 10 days later, on June 14, 1947, a rancher named Brazel discovered strange debris on his property near Roswell. It included metallic fragments, foil-like material, and wooden beams. The debris was strewn over an area about 200 yards in diameter. Then on June 24, 1947, 10 days after Brazel's discovery, Kenneth Arnold, a civilian pilot traveling to Yakima, Washington, had a brief sighting of 9 peculiar objects traveling at high speeds. He shared his account with journalists, who then coined the phrases flying saucers. The report of the sighting garnered huge media coverage, and within weeks, numerous individuals came forward with similar claims. On July 4, 1947, there was a surge in reports from Portland, Oregon. Police officers and pedestrians reported observing discs that resembled chrome hubcaps in shape. These objects were also traveling at high speeds and exhibited oscillating movements. On that same evening, the crew of United Airlines Flight 105 witnessed 2 groups of disc-shaped objects flying in formation. On the next day, on July 5th, Brazel, the rancher, after hearing about all the sightings of flying discs, began considering the idea that maybe his debris could potentially be a flying disc aircraft. He got in touch with his local sheriff, who also liked that idea, so the sheriff then reported the matter to the authorities at the Roswell Army Airfield. On July 8th, the debris found by Brazel was reportedly identified by the military to be materials from the fragments of a weather balloon. While they were actually wrong at the time, they didn't know it because it was decades later that Project Mogul's balloon was found to more likely be the source, based on a July 1994 report by the Air Force. On July 29th, Amazing Stories editor Raymond Palmer interviewed a man named Harold Dahl. Dahl claimed to witness a saucer near Maury Island in Washington. Dahl claimed that a donut-shaped craft was dropping objects onto the earth, which fell onto his boat, breaking his worker's arm and killing a dog. The alleged objects turned out to be a white type of very lightweight metal. To make matters worse, 2 military personnel who were investigating the matter died in a plane crash on the way home from their investigation. Shortly after the crash, Dahl himself dubbed the whole thing a hoax, probably due to reality hitting him in the face. The investigation documents outline several alternative narratives that Dahl shared with local newspapers and other media platforms. Ultimately, the documents implicated that he and a partner had reached out to multiple publications with the intention of making a profitable arrangement. In total, 800 similar sightings were reported throughout 1947 after the Roswell Incident. So are we having deja vu yet? From March 1952 to December 1969, a Project Blue Book collected 12,618 UFO reports. Ultimately, though, the report concluded that UFOs were generally a result of a form of hysteria, hoaxers seeking publicity, pathological persons, or misidentifying conventional objects. So, to sum things up here, confusion with the media and the military about the source of the debris and other stories is what sparked new conspiracy theories for decades. But we know that flying saucers or discs weren't a new concept. They are a science fiction invention, and if I haven't made it clear yet, these events mirror exactly with what happened during the Airship Wave sightings in 1896 and 1897.
In both cases, there was a priming of science fiction literature and popular media.
So what do you think? Have I convinced you enough? Be sure to follow me on social media for updates and short-form content on topics like this one. And if you're passionate about exposing falsehoods as I am, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like the video. By doing so, you'll be joining the quest for truth in an era of misinformation.